All right, so now to put my stitches on a holder for the sleeve, I knit from my beginning or end of round all the way over to my first marker, my first raglan increase. Now, if you notice that when you read the instructions, the raglan stitch, that stitch that's between your markers, that gets put in with the body. The part that stays with the sleeve is the part that's between the two raglan stitches. So the first thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to just take a darning needle and a thread, and I'm just going to put these stitches on the needle like this. Alternatively, I can use one of those bands to just slide them on there, and that works really well. I just know not everybody has them. Word of warning about those bands. I really like them. They're very useful. Don't buy it from a knitting supply place because, oh my gosh, they charge so much for just 3 or 4 small pieces of it. Whereas if you buy an entire spool of it, you cut it yourself. You cut a couple pieces as long or as short as you typically use, and it's a fraction of the cost as from what you would pay at the various yarn shops. I got mine at Amazon. I know not everybody likes to shop Amazon, but that's where I got mine. And they come in different sizes, different colors. Honestly, I like the narrower bands better than the thicker bands because for me, hold on. For me, the narrower bands tend to go through the stitches much easier regardless of what size needle I'm using. So I'm using a size 7 needle here, and I use the smallest tube that they make. I'll try to get the name of that, what that stuff is, and I'll include it in my email to you with this update. All right, so you see what I'm doing is just pulling through some of these stitches. Word of advice, you want to use a contrasting color, but you do not want to use a color that will bleed, because even if you're not getting it wet, this piece of yarn is going to be in your sweater holding these sleeve stitches the entire time you're working on your body until you get to the sleeves. And if it bleeds, it will bleed onto your yarn. You don't want that to happen. So pick a color that you know is going to be a contrast, but not one that's going to bleed. All right, now I'm making sure that I have the raglan stitches as part of the body here. Let me get, there we go. So you can see there's my raglan stitch here. So that's staying with the body. And when I start it, the raglan stitch is staying with the body. So now I have this yarn that's through the sleeve stitches, and all I'm going to do is just put a very, very loose knot in there just to hold things in place. All right, now we have to close the gap between the front and back of our sweater. For my particular size, it says to cast on 9 stitches. Some of you it's only 5, some of you it's 11. And it says to use a backwards loop cast on. The backwards loop cast on is where you just wrap the yarn around your finger and then slide it down like that. Now, for those of you who have tried a backward loop cast on, you'll notice it gets amazingly loose and you end up with a really long thread at the end of this. So my way of doing that is to only cast on 8 stitches, cast on 1 less that you need, and then make a stitch with that tail that you have at the end. I'll show you what I mean when I come around to this again. So instead of putting on 9 stitches, I'm going to put on 8 stitches. So that's 1, 2, and notice I turn my work so that as I'm putting the stitches on, it's on the bottom where my fabric is. All right, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, I'm making a loop. 6, 7, 8. All right. Now I'm going to knit across till I get to my next marker. Be right back. All right, now I'm over to the left side. I've put my scrap yarn through my sleeves and I'm ready to do the cast on of not 9 but 8 backward loop stitches. So again, I'm going to hold this so I'm working where the base of the stitch is going to be at the bottom, and I'm going to count out 8. So all you do is you put your finger, my right index finger, just on top of the yarn, turn my finger and put the needle through that loop, and when you pull it, you've got a stitch. This is the typical method for casting on when you're doing the underarm stitches, because you don't want a lot of bulk. And what we're going to do is pick up these stitches when we knit our sleeve. It's very clear where the stitches are, but you don't want a real thick stitch there. You want it to be fairly seamless. So that's 1, 2, again, lay my finger on top of the thread, turn it, and then just stick the needle along there. 3, whoop. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, I'm going to knit across. So I've got this huge gap. Here's my front. Here's my back. Let me slide my stitches here so you can see what I'm doing. All right, so now I'm just going to pick up and start knitting on the back while these stitches are just hanging out here. You want to make sure, now do you see how, because I've been moving things around, do you see how this is now twisted? You want to make sure you don't twist those stitches. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a mess when you go to knit it together. So make sure that your stitch bottoms are all along the bottom in line with your work. Pick up the knitting the other side. Now I'm going to connect the back to the front. And all I'm going to do is just start knitting. And I want to make sure I don't have that twisted. So I go in there and I'm just going to start knitting right straight across like that. All right. Now we've got one more thing we need to talk about, and that's how we put that extra stitch, that stitch I took out, the stitch that I need when I get in here to knit it. So let me knit around to the first side and I'll show you what I'm doing. All right, now I'm back to my first sleeve. So I'm back to where the initial part where I cast on the 8 stitches. I'm stopping 2 stitches before I get there. There's a couple little tweaks that I do just so that the armhole, and when you pick up the sleeves, it works a little bit easier. The first tweak I do is 2 stitch before and 2 stitches after I do these cast on stitches, I knit through the back loop. And by knitting through the back loop, what I'm doing is putting a little bit of a twist in the stitches. And what that does is it helps close this up and tighten this up so that I don't have holes in the underarm of my sweater. So now I'm going to knit these 8 stitches. And do you see as I go to knit these with the backwards loop, you see how that loop is? And I'm showing you this because we're going to make one of these when we're done. But you see how the thread is coming out to the front underneath this. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and you see how that thread is getting longer and longer. 5, 6, 7. Now before I knit this 8th one, I want to point out how this stitches on here. So when I stick my needle in here, if I pull that needle out, do you see how it's just wrapped around and I'm going in like that? So this is 8, and now I've got this big long thread. So what I want to do is I want to make that same kind of loop-de-loop. Yeah. So I'm just putting a loop in here so that this is going to come out like that. So that's my 9th stitch, and it uses up that excess yarn so you don't have this huge threads just hanging out there. Now I'm going to knit in the back loop here twice, and I'm going to do one more thing. So on my cast on stitches, on those 9 stitches, the middle of those 9 now is my new beginning and end of round. So here's the 2 I just knit. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4. This 5th stitch right here is the middle of what I've just cast on. So I'm going to put a marker there, and I'm not going to put a marker like on either side of it. I'm going to put the marker around it. And I'm doing that because when I go to pick up the stitches for the sleeve, it's going to be so much easier. I slid it off the needle so it's on the band so I could get my marker around it a little easier. So there's 2, 4, 5. It's the 5th stitch I want to go around. So I'm going to come in and around like that and put this marker in place. Now, by putting it around the stitch and not next to the stitch, when I start picking up stitches, I know that is exactly where I need to start my picking up stitches for this sleeve in the next step. So now what I'll do is just knit right around till I get to the next armhole, and I'm going to do the same thing again.